Hey there, welcome back to the Parkinson's Disease Education Podcast. With most of the treatments that we're looking at with Parkinson's disease, aside from the ones that treat symptoms like the medications we're all familiar with, a lot of the research surrounds things called disease-modifying treatments, or some kind of basically a pathway to not just treat the symptoms, but to modify the actual disease process, slow it down, reverse it, and so forth. What we're going to be discussing in this episode is yet another approach that has been researched that's similar to in that line of thinking, and that's called Buntanetap. Buntanetap has been getting a lot of attention recently because it doesn't tackle dopamine directly, but it does target the abnormal protein production involved in Parkinson's that we're going to discuss at the beginning of the episode to reorient you to some of the neurobiology that's going on here. So without further ado, let's hit the intro. On the other side, I'm going to explain a little bit more about that to you. We'll learn together what Buntanetap could potentially do for the future of Parkinson's treatment and research. Hit it. Welcome to the Parkinson's Disease Education Show, where we demystify the disease and empower you as the person with Parkinson's disease to reach your true potential. The content contained on this show is for informational purposes only and is not meant to be a replacement for information or advice that you receive from your in-person medical or therapy professionals. If you haven't already, I hope you'll consider subscribing, and for an even more personalized experience, please ask us about our memberships. Now, without further ado, let's start the show. Okay, so let's take a deep breath and go back to the beginning for just a second, especially if those of you who are new to the channel have not really learned about the pathophysiology of Parkinson's disease, meaning how the disease process works. I want to go into that for just a brief minute to reorient you to what we're discussing with the treatment of Buntanetap, and then we'll go into that in just a minute. But essentially, think of dopamine loss as the primary chemical impairment of Parkinson's disease, but actually that's really a downstream event, meaning it's not the primary cause of the disease, it's an effect of the disease. We don't know an exact root cause, but if we go to at least what we do know in what's going on with the disease process, we know that upstream, before the dopamine loss from the neurons that are dying, the dopamine producing neurons dying off is, again, that's a downstream effect. Upstream, we're seeing an accumulation of a normal protein, but it's an abnormal accumulation of a protein called alpha-synuclein. That is what ends up forming Lewy bodies and ends up accumulating in nervous tissue all over the body, resulting in a lot of the motor and non-motor symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Now, the dopamine loss is the primary reason for the motor issues in Parkinson's. But between that and the accumulation of alpha-synuclein, you get the other issues like neuropathy, blood pressure regulation problems, digestive issues, all these things. Because of that alpha-synuclein accumulation, there's inflammation in the cells, oxidative stress issues, mitochondrial dysfunction because of the oxidative stress, and yada, yada, yada. So it all kind of ties into this one big mess of Parkinson's disease. Basically, alpha-synuclein misfolds, it aggregates, forms the Lewy bodies. That is what's contributing to neuronal dysfunction and death. And if you follow theories like Jonathan Sattner-Bernstein's dopamine toxicity theory, it goes even down further rabbit holes of, is the dopamine toxicity what's causing all these issues, even including the alpha-synuclein accumulation, all that sort of thing. So, but anyway, without going down that rabbit hole, basically most current treatments, again, you're either replacing the dopamine with something like levodopa, or you're stimulating dopamine receptors, dopamine agonists, or you're preventing, or it's a combination of that and preventing dopamine breakdown. So things like COMT inhibitors, MAOB inhibitors, what's the one, Neurians, A2A receptor antagonists, that kind of thing. All of these things summarized improve symptoms. They don't slow progression, meaning by definition, they're not disease-modifying treatments. They really just help manage the disease symptoms, which in and of itself is very important, and it's a good thing that we have something to deal with that, but it doesn't make progression change. So that's what we're talking about with things like Buntanetap. So Buntanetap is formerly known as a drug called ANVS401. It's being developed by a company called Innovus Bio. Originally, it was an orally administered medication or drug. What makes it unique is that it doesn't target dopamine receptors. It actually regulates protein translation at the mRNA level. So what that means is that is where you get, when you get those misfolded alpha-synuclein proteins, part of the reason that those misfold is because in the translation process, meaning that's when the DNA becomes RNA becomes protein. That's the threefold process of genetic material becoming a protein produced by a cell. When you're going back to that process of protein translation at the mRNA level, if you can affect that, you're going to affect the protein that's being produced. In other words, you're going to be able to potentially prevent the misfolding of the alpha-synuclein. Alpha-synuclein is a normal protein. I want to emphasize that again. But when it's over-translated and overproduced, it misfolds. That's when you get the clumps called Lewy bodies. What's really cool about Buntanetap is it doesn't just affect alpha-synuclein, it affects other abnormal and neurotoxic proteins. That includes other ones like amyloid beta, which is found in Alzheimer's disease. Also, it will prevent production of tau protein, which is an abnormal protein found in conditions such as frontotemporal dementia, progressive supranuclear palsy. Also, there's TDP43, and that's also found in ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or Lou Gehrig's disease. So in other words, Buntanetap isn't just a Parkinson-specific drug. It could actually affect a lot of neurodegenerative diseases. So going back to cell anatomy 101, whenever you have a cell, within every cell in the body, regardless of what type of cell it is, if it has a nucleus, which is where your genetic material for that cell is stored, you have the DNA contained within that nucleus. Surrounding that nucleus is called the endoplasmic reticulum, and within the rough endoplasmic reticulum, rough ER, you've got little organelles called ribosomes. Those ribosomes are what will translate, they will be translating proteins from the mRNA. So DNA, helix of DNA is unwound, it's transcribed. Then when that mRNA, that's been transcribed into an mRNA molecule, mRNA will go to the ribosome basically reads it like a little tape player, and out the other end, it spits a protein, so it translates the mRNA into a protein. So the Buntanetap acts at the ribosome level in order to influence the translation of specific mRNA. And those mRNAs that were in question here are the ones that would code for the neurotoxic proteins. So a lot of therapies we talked about on the podcast are basically affecting alpha-synuclein once it's already built up, and breaking it down. But in this case, we're looking at preventing the actual translation of that protein so that it doesn't ever accumulate in the first place, if that makes sense. So that's basically an upstream technique to prevent the downstream issue. So in effect, this could not only reduce or prevent protein aggregation, but it could decrease neuroinflammation, because again, the presence of this protein in itself can be inflammatory. It can improve the survival of the neurons involved in dopamine production, and potentially, I say potentially with a big capital P, slow disease progression. That's the working theory. What research is behind Buntanetap? Well, thankfully there is actually some research, and it's not just in animal preclinical models. Buntanetap has at least gone through early phase 2 trials. And that's not the last step in clinical trials, which would be like phase 3, but at least it's gone well on the way toward phase 3. And I'll share what results we do have right now. To this point, phase 2 trials have been conducted with Buntanetap in early Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. And what was found in the reported findings in Parkinson's participants were improvements in motor function per the MDS-UPDRS scores, which is pretty significant, improvement in cognition, also rapid onset of improvements, sometimes within weeks of treatment. On the surface, that's exciting and very promising, but we have to remember these were smaller trials, shorter duration trials, and they weren't definitive phase 3 studies. Usually the phase 3 trials are a longer duration and they're larger scale. Data interpretation within these trials has been a little bit debated in scientific circles as well. So some of the signals were encouraging, others were more modest. Overall, with everything we're talking about, it's still investigational. So we don't have the long-term data we would need to make definitive results known, or definitive proof that it works. There's no clear disease-modifying proof at this point, and there's also not regulatory approval for continuation of the trials, but also not for treatment using it. So it's promising, but it's still early, unfortunately. But it sounds more promising than some of the other things that have come out recently. Okay, so just to briefly compare and contrast some other treatments we have talked about recently. So we've talked recently about prasinezumab, which is an alpha-synuclein antibody. So that's basically a manufactured antibody, which is a protein that would target and attack the alpha-synuclein and make it able to be destroyed by the immune system. So that would be able to bind and clear the misfolded proteins outside the cells and basically take care of it once the alpha-synuclein is present. Gene therapy approaches might attempt to increase dopamine production or synthesis, or modify circuits basically circuits in the brain as far as the signals needed for dopaminergic actions to take place, I guess. And also there's neurotropic factors which attempt to rescue, protect the dying neurons, prevent future death. Buntanetap is different than those previous three because it targets protein production broadly, not just a single protein and not just a single receptor. That's pretty powerful, or it could be powerful. And if it's proven to be efficacious, proven to actually make a big difference, especially with bigger trials, more randomized trials, that kind of thing, that could be a game changer for sure. But the question that is raised by all that is, like, how selective is it? Like, is it really truly going to target alpha-synuclein, that kind of thing? It sounds like it would, just because of the fact that it's more broad spectrum. It's not super specific. Also, what are the long-term effects of modifying the translation of the proteins? Is it actually really going to make a difference long-term in the disease progression, or is it more just going to treat that initial problem with the protein translation? Is it actually going to make a difference long-term? In other words, is it short-term results or is it long-term results? And could there be unintended consequences and side effects we don't know about yet? That's undetermined just because it's still being studied as we speak. What we do know so far of reported side effects in the trials that have existed is that the side effects have generally been mild. It's dependent on how much or how little was given in terms of dose. And most of them included some symptoms like gastrointestinal symptoms, things like nausea and headache. Nothing more serious than that at this point, but we also need bigger and longer trials to understand that safety and side effect comparison of side effects and see if that's consistent. In summary, Buntanetap represents a shift in strategy. It's not really a radical shift, but it is a shift in strategy. It's not about dopamine replacement. It is about upstream biology, which is a different approach. It's a top-down approach instead of the other direction. And that's pretty exciting. And I think that gives it some promise over some other treatments, in my opinion. But again, it's not approved at this point. It's not known or proven to modify the disease process yet, at least as of this recording. And it still needs more robust phase 3 data to really show how effective it's going to be. As with other treatments that are exciting that we've talked about, this is a look at slowing progression rather than just masking the symptoms. And if it really truly can reduce production of alpha-synuclein and other neurotoxic proteins, this could be a game changer if it does prove to be effective. We definitely need more data, so as always, I'm going to continue to follow the research and breaking it down in a way that makes sense to you all as the audience. If you found this helpful, I do hope you'll subscribe, share your thoughts in the comments. The best way to support this channel, as always, try to mention this at the end, is to support our channel sponsors with links found in the description or the show notes below, and or consider joining the channel memberships. That's a direct way to support the work we're doing for the YouTube channel and the podcast, so I appreciate that in advance. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode. As always, be empowered. I'll catch you later.